The Orioles bullpen was a little shaky at times in 2023. And in 2024, they'll be without Félix Bautista, the best closer in baseball. So the O's may want to look to free agency to improve the pen next season. But which relievers are out there to sign? I'll get to my wish list of free agent relievers for the O's coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, November 8th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to continue this Orioles free agency wish list series. On yesterday's episode, we talked about my wish list of the top 10 starting pitchers within the Orioles price range that I wanted the O's to go after in free agency. Make sure to check that one out if you haven't already. Today, we talk about the top 10 relievers on my wish list in free agency that are, once again, unfortunately because of the existence of John Angelos, in the Orioles price range. I'll talk about a bunch of guys who have pitched for the Astros, some maybe off the radar guys, and then some players who could even fill in as the Orioles closer with Félix Bautista out. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 just if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. So we'll jump right into this one. Free agency wish list for the bullpen. My top 10 options for the O's. And off the bat, just like I did on yesterday's episode when I talked about starting pitching, when I said, look, from everything we've seen from John Angelos, everything he said over the past few years, the Orioles, it just seems like, and I would love for him to surprise us, but it seems like they're not going to play at the top of this money pool, right? So on yesterday's episode, talked about they're not going to get Blake Snell, right? They're not going to get Yamamoto, or they're not going to get Montgomery or Aaron Nola. Similar thing actually in the relievers. I've got 4 names of relievers here that I actually think the Orioles won't be playing in that pool. Now, these guys aren't going to make nearly as much money as those starters would. I mean, even Josh Hader, who is the number 1 reliever available, may not even get $100 million in his total contract. But for a reliever, the Orioles have shown over the past few years, they are willing and able to build a good bullpen out of young guys, waiver claims, reclamation projects. They're willing to do that. But they still have dipped into free agency a bit for the bullpen. Did it last year, right? They brought in Michael Givens on the 1-year, $4 million deal. It was a major league veteran reliever, just didn't work out for a multitude of reasons. They're going to do that with at least one guy again this year, especially with Félix Bautista out. The question is, do they need to get multiple of those guys? I believe they need to bring in 2 relievers this offseason just to make certain this bullpen is set without Félix for 2024. But the guys at the top of the list that they're maybe not even going to be making like $50 million in their total contract. But for a reliever, I just don't see the Orioles making these moves. Josh Hader's number 1. Jordan Hicks is up there, just a hard-throwing right-hander, got traded to the Blue Jays this year. I just don't see the Orioles going to like $40+ million for a reliever. Robert Stevenson is up there, kind of resurrected his career in the Rays bullpen down the stretch. I think he's going to make himself a lot of money that the O's aren't going to pay for. And then Yariel Rodriguez, who is a Cuban-born pitcher who was pitching in Asia for a bit, is becoming a free agent. It looks like he might command, upwards of $50+ million, and he's probably a reliever, but could potentially be a starter, so I'm just taking him off the list as well. Those are the guys I think, unfortunately, out of the Orioles and John Angelos' weirdly, stupidly set price range. But now I'm going to get to my top 10 of guys who I think are in the Orioles range, and we will start with number 10. Number 10 is the 36-year-old right-hander Ryan Brasier. Now, you may remember the name Ryan Brasier as he pitched for the Boston Red Sox for a while, was on that team for a number of years, and 3-4 years ago was a really good reliever, like a really, really good middle reliever for the Red Sox. Then this year, he comes in, final year of kind of his rookie deal with Boston, or one of his deals with Boston here, and it wasn't very good. He has a 7.29 ERA in his first 21 innings of the season with the struggling Red Sox, and they DFA him. And the Dodgers make the waiver claim. And all of a sudden you're like, oh boy, here we go. The Dodgers see something that's going to work. And oh boy, did the Dodgers ever see something that's going to work. In 38 2/3 innings down the stretch with the Dodgers, Ryan Brazier posted a 0.79 ERA. They found it. They added a cutter to Brazier's repertoire. It became arguably his best pitch when they added it, and he was a lockdown reliever. Now, I've got projections on what players are going to make these projections. Shout out to John Becker of FanGraphs. He has his free agency matrix up, put it up, I believe, on Tuesday. These are the projections he makes, and he basically averages out every publication's free agency projections. So the projection for Brazier is 1 year, $5 million. That's essentially what the Orioles gave to Michael Givens last offseason. If they can get this kind of production for that kind of money, this should be an easy move for the Orioles to make. Now, again, he is 36, so you wonder, will he be able to repeat it? But overall, 24% strikeout rate, 8% walk rate, and about 60 innings overall last season. And listen, his slider was still great, even with the implementation of the cutter. Opponents hit 120 against it. And a 3.8% barrel rate against him was the 95th percentile of Major League pitchers. He had a good year. I get that he's 36, but he is a cheap option that seemed to find a new pitch and maybe extend his career in 2023. Number 9 on the list, the first of a few Astros who are going to be on here. It's Ryan Stanek, the 32-year-old right-hander who John Becker's free agency matrix says could get a 2-year, $16 million deal in free agency this season in his first time hitting the open market. Now, Stanek's just kind of been a steadying presence for the Astros bullpen over the last few years. Never really been like the 9th inning guy or really even the 8th inning guy. He was close to that a couple of years ago when he had a really minuscule ERA, but this season, 50 2/3 innings, 24% strikeout rate, 10% walk rate, a 4.09 ERA. It wasn't his best year out of the Astros bullpen and probably cost himself some money by having a somewhat down year in his year before free agency, because he's been much better than that the last couple of years. And he was used in the playoffs by the Astros, but not in those regular high leverage roles that we had seen him over the past couple of years. You may remember Stanek from the Rays a few years back when they kind of started using the opener. Ryan Stanek was their opener. Like, he got a bunch of starts years ago with the Rays. But for Stanek, listen, he is an extreme fly ball pitcher. 55%, I should say, fly ball rate is the 6th highest in all of Major League Baseball this year among guys who threw 50 or more innings. So the bigger ballpark in Baltimore could help with the big left field wall. Remember, it is a hitter's ballpark in Houston, as we know. Baltimore could help him out, still throwing 98 with the fastball, still has an elite splitter that opponents hit just 189 against, 47% whiff rate. That is the 10th best of all splitters in baseball. It's a good, solid middle reliever for not a high price. Orioles could be all over that. Number 8 on my list, 31-year-old right-hander Jakob Junis, who the free agency matrix from John Becker predicts he'll get a 2-year, $14 million deal on the free agent market. Again, for Junis, really his first full-time hitting free agency. And Junis is an interesting pitcher because he's kind of a swingman. He was with the Royals for a long time, and they were trying him out as a starter. It just wasn't really working, and he ended up being traded to the Giants. And the Giants used him in some intriguing roles. Now, he only made 4 starts this year for the Giants, so not necessarily like the most swingman Giants guy because they used a lot of starters, and Junis only went 4 times this year. But he still did throw 86 innings on the season, which is more than even your most used reliever. I mean, think about Yennier Cano, like he only threw about 70 innings. So still, Junis was used more. And it was a good season. 3.87 ERA in 86 innings, 26% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate. Those are great numbers from the right-hander Jakob Junis. And what makes him so intriguing to me is 20 of his appearances went 2 innings or more out of the Giants bullpen. That is a really intriguing player to have in your pen, a guy who you can go to 2-3 times a week and can give you 2 innings or more. He went up to as many as 4 innings in some relief outings this year with the Giants. He's not the most lockdown pitcher, but he doesn't walk guys. His strikeout rate is well above league average, and he's got a really good slider. That's been his kind of calling card. Opponents hit just 216 against it. Now, his main fastball is a sinker, and when he had issues this year, it was the sinker. Opponents hit 416 against Junis' sinker this year. But he started introducing a 4-seam fastball a little bit, and it was having much more success. If the Orioles got him, I think they would go away from the sinker some, bring in the 4-seam fastball more, stick with that slider, and maybe, just maybe, have a really interesting swingman who could give you a spot start as well. And for 2 years, $14 million would be a really, really interesting value play. I am very intrigued by Jakob Junis, and I think he could be a really good fit for the Orioles. Number 7 on my list is Keenan Middleton, who's had quite a ride in many a bullpens over the past few years. Middleton now hitting free agency again, the 30-year-old right-hander. And again, the free agency matrix from John Becker projects just a 1-year, $4 million contract. So very much in the Orioles price range. And Middleton had a pretty good season this year. 50 2/3 innings pitched out of the bullpen. 30% strikeout rate is elite. 11% walk rate, a little bit concerning, but not terrible. And a very, very high 57% ground ball rate is up kind of near like Yinyer Cano levels of ground ball rate. That's how many grounders he was getting. Middleton with that really good sinker to get the ground balls, had a 3.38 ERA on the year. And here's the good thing about Middleton. He gets a lot of ground balls, but he's not per se a just ground ball pitcher, right? He also gets strikeouts, as I talked about. He's a fastball, slider, changeup pitcher. All 3 of those pitches have a whiff rate of 33% or higher, which basically means all 3 of his pitches, he's getting a swing and miss at least a third of the time he throws them. And here's where Middleton is really intriguing, because he's in the top 10% in baseball in a lot of important categories. He is the 90th plus percentile in average exit velocity against him, chase rate, whiff rate, strikeout percentage, hard hit percentage against him, and ground ball rate. That is a really intriguing group of statistics for a reliever who's only 30, right? He's still got some good years ahead of him. If he's really only going to command like a 1-year, $4 or $5 million deal, kind of feels like a no-brainer for the Orioles. Now, he has jumped around a lot over the past couple of years, so you don't really know what that could be about. I mean, he's had some struggles recently, then he kind of pulled it back together on the mound. But if the O's can find it there, that is a cheap and good relief option. But we got my top 6 on my reliever free agency wish list coming up next. We'll get to 6 through 4 after the break, and we'll talk about a couple of guys who both pitched on the Angels this year and then did not pitch for the Angels. And then another guy the O's have seen a lot in the AL East, who I have always wanted to be an Oriole and is finally this year hitting free agency. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, I'm just as sad as you all are that the Major League Baseball season is over, but sports do not stop. College basketball started on Monday night. College football is rolling along. The NBA, the NHL, and of course, it's NFL season. The Ravens look awesome. And you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 just if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, well, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app, it's so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So it's my Orioles reliever free agency wish list. As free agency really kind of truly opened on Tuesday this week, more than 5 days after the World Series. Everything's open. Everybody ready to be signed. They got the options figured out, the qualifying offers figured out. Everything kind of ready to go here. Now, we will get some more free agents as the offseason rolls on with the non-tenders, the guys who are kind of basically released from their contracts. But that group is generally guys who are coming off pretty bad seasons and not really near the top of anybody's wish list. They are more reclamation projects when we get to that. So we have the group of the top relievers that are out there. And I just gave you 10 through 7 on my wish list. Now to number 6. It is the 30-year-old right-hander Rodrigo Lopez, who could cost a little bit more money. John Becker's free agency matrix predicts a 3-year, $31.5 million contract. And again, that is only $10.5 million per year, which for a good reliever is your regular asking price. It might be a little out of the O's price range. I would put this maybe right at the top of the Orioles price range. It could be out of it. You could argue that this is out of the O's, sadly, out of the O's price range for a reliever. But he's been really good. Right? 66 innings this year for Lopez, who had such a weird season. 30% strikeout rate, great. 12% walk rate, a little bit worrisome, but he still pitched to a 3.27 ERA. Lopez started the year with the White Sox. They were terrible. He was traded to the Angels at the deadline, along with his friend, who he's played throughout pro ball with, Lucas Giolito. And then a month later, when the Angels decided, well, we're not competing anymore, they waived all their trade deadline acquisitions, including Lopez, who was then claimed on waivers by the Guardians and played out the rest of the season. Had a little injury issue at the end of the year, but I believe he's all good, but did play out the rest of the year with the Guardians. Now, it's still an awesome fastball, right? Averages over 98 miles per hour. Opponents hit just 188 against that fastball this year. And for Lopez, he's got an interesting secondary pitch. Now, his main secondary is the slider, which has been solid, and he's thrown it a lot in his career, and he was a starter for so long, and now he's kind of new to this relieving thing. It's just the last couple of years that the White Sox really officially moved him into the bullpen. But he started to throw this changeup a little bit, and he only threw it 65 times this season, which is not a lot, even for a reliever. But opponents hit only 154 against it when he threw it, and it seems to be his weapon against left-handed hitters that he has found. The Orioles love to hone in a changeup for any pitcher. They have shown that in their pitching development program. This could be an interesting match if the Orioles are willing to shell out a little bit more money. Number 5 on my list, going a little bit older here, 34-year-old left-handed pitcher Matt Moore is next on my list, and a little cheaper as well. The free agency matrix from John Becker predicting a 1-year, $7 million contract for Matt Moore. And Matt Moore, what a career it's been. It was a starting pitcher for so long with teams like the Rays and others, and then he just kind of, nobody noticed. He kind of went to Asia, I believe, for a couple of years and came back and just kind of converted himself into a really good major league reliever. Last year, did have a little bit of an oblique injury early in the season, which cut down his innings total a bit, but he still ended up throwing 52 2/3 innings, 28% strikeout rate, really good, 7% walk rate, really good, 2.56 ERA, really, really good. And he was another guy, right, who bounced around, was on one team, was traded to the Angels, then was waived. Yeah, it was just those weird guys who went to the Angels this year. But it's good stuff. Now, 52 2/3 innings was the least amount of innings he's ever thrown in any big league season, mostly because he had been a starter for so long, then he was a healthy reliever, and this year he did miss a little time with the oblique injury, but still, he's got that awesome changeup that gets righties out, 163 batting average against it, and his 35% chase rate in total is in the 98th percentile in all of baseball. He gets guys to swing at pitches out of the zone, which is what makes him effective. He's not really a closer type at this point, but he's a really versatile guy who, because he has that starter background, can give you multiple innings at any time out of the bullpen as well. And he just continues to be good. And he seems to have the stuff where he's 34. Like, I could see him being a good reliever for the next 5 years still. Think could be a good investment for the Orioles. Speaking of left-handers, though, next on my list, number 4, is the 32-year-old lefty, Wandy Peralta. Now, Wandy Peralta is a guy I've just been so intrigued with the last couple of years when he has pitched for the Yankees. Peralta, who the free agency matrix predicts will command a 1-year, $7.5 million deal, so pretty cheap for a good reliever. And he had an interesting year this year. 54 innings with the Yankees, 2.83 ERA, really good number, right? 23% strikeout rate, that's good. 13% walk rate is very concerning. League average for a reliever is about 8% right there. That is concerning. But he's still an elite ground ball pitcher. 57% ground ball rate, again, is one of the best in all of baseball. Now, Wandy Peralta in 2022 was unbelievable, right? His ERA was down around 2. He wasn't walking anybody. He was getting a crazy amount of ground balls. His walk rate just about doubled this year, but his strikeouts went up and his ground balls actually went up, which didn't seem possible. So he still had a pretty good year. And his changeup is one of the most fascinating pitches I've ever seen. 37% whiff rate. Opponents hit just 185 against the changeup from the lefty. It devastates lefties. It devastates righties. His sinker's good too. They hit just 219 against that pitch as well. I would trust the Orioles to bring in Wandy Peralta, hone in that command that was so good 2 years ago, and he struggled with it a bit last year with the Yankees, and that will probably be the reason why, if the Yankees do not re-sign him, is because of the command struggles he had, despite how good he was in their bullpen. He changes up timing so much. He'll work fast, he'll work slow. He's just very fun to watch. Did have a little bit of a tricep injury in September, missed the final 2 or 3 weeks of the year, but looks like he'll be all good, ready to go health-wise for spring training 2024. I've just always been enamored by Wandy Peralta, so in terms of his performance last year, he should probably be lower than 4 on this list, but this is kind of my guy that I want to see the O's go after, so that's why he is up at number 4. We got the top 3 coming up on the list next. Maybe not the big name guys you would expect. At least one of them is, maybe even 2. But some guys who I think if the O's brought him in would just be perfect fits for this bullpen. We'll get to them next to finish off the pod. So I got 3 more relief pitchers to get to. It's my Orioles free agent reliever wish list, counting down the top 10 relievers I would like to see the Orioles sign that are within their unfortunate price range for the O's and John Angelos. Let's move on to number 3. I've already tweeted multiple times throughout the postseason that this guy is a future Oriole. And number 3 on my list is the 31-year-old right-hander, Phil Maton. Phil Maton, John Becker's free agency matrix, has a projection of a 2-year, $18 million contract for Phil Maton. Because Phil Maton quietly has just been one of the best middle relievers in baseball for the last few seasons. This year with the Astros, dude was just awesome. He was just quietly awesome because he's not Ryan Presley, right? And he's not a couple of their guys who is paid the big money and gets the 7th and the 8th inning. Like Phil Maton might have been the best 6th inning guy in all of baseball this year. 66 innings for Maton, a 3.00 ERA, 27% strikeout rate, good, 9% walk rate, right around league average. And in 6 innings in the postseason for the Astros, he did not allow a run. He was shut down in that postseason. It's a guy who throws his curveball most. It's a good pitch, used it 40% of the time. Opponents hit just 169 against it, got a 36% whiff rate. That is a really, really good curveball that he throws. And again, he doesn't throw that hard as his fastball, right? It's still low 90s at this point, but the stuff is still really good. Now, this was his first elite stuff year, but he had still been very good the past couple of years. Was initially with the Guardians, came over to Houston in that Miles Straw trade, which Houston very much won because Miles Straw turns out, even though he's a great defensive center fielder, literally cannot hit at all. And Maton's become a very good middle reliever. And here's the best part about Phil Maton, where he kind of reminds me a lot of Danny Coulomb. He feels like the right-handed version of Danny Coulomb. The O's could definitely use that because Coulomb was a great find. Maton, a lot of breaking balls, right? More than his fastball. Danny Coulomb doesn't throw the hardest fastball, 91, 92. Danny Coulomb. And for Phil Maton, his 23.5% hard hit rate against him this year was the lowest of any pitcher, qualified reliever or starter, in all of Major League Baseball. He had the lowest hard hit percentage against him. Danny Coulomb was top 10 and mostly top 5 on that same list for the entire season as well. If you had a lefty Coulomb and a righty version of Coulomb, I think that would be a great fit, kind of the 6th or 7th inning of the Orioles bullpen. Number 2 on my list, I go for the oldest guy I have on the list, but just seems to be what they tried to do with Michael Givens last year. They could do a better job of this year if they went after the 38-year-old right-hander, Adam Ottavino. Now, I get it. He is 38 years old. That is a little bit concerning, but only the projection from the free agency matrix, just a 1-year, $7 million free agent deal. The Orioles certainly should be able to pay that. And he just continues to be a solid, reliable, healthy big league reliever. 61 2/3 innings this year for Ottavino. 24% strikeout rate was good. 11% walk rate was a little up for him, but he's always been a guy who's walked a few players. 56% ground ball rate was great. Posted a 3.21 ERA. Was kind of wasting away a little bit in the Mets bullpen this year. Don't think they'll bring him back. But here's the thing about Adam Ottavino. 5 consecutive years now, he has tossed at least 60 innings out of the bullpen. 60 innings is kind of the benchmark for like a reliever who you can trust the entire season. If they can get 60 innings or more, you knew you could count on that guy to be healthy all year out of your pen. He's done it 5 straight years. And I get that he's 38 and probably more likely to break down as his career goes on. But he's still got that really good slider that he's had his entire career that just sweeps across the strike zone and can be impossible for righties to hit. And he's basically been good out of various big league bullpens since 2012. Like, he's been doing this for over 10 years, and he's adjusted as he's gotten older, and he's lost some fastball velocity since, he was throwing really hard back when he was in the Rockies bullpen. But Ottavino just seems like a cheap, somewhat leader in the clubhouse guy to come in and just be a nice middle relief, reliable, healthy piece who's been there, done that before in the O's bullpen. I just think he would be a good fit for the O's. He knows the AL East, pitched for the Yankees. I would like to see him in Baltimore. But my number 1 selection on my reliever free agency wish list, which might be a little controversial because he's been involved in some dust-ups on the field in his career, but that is Hector Neris, the 34-year-old right-hander who had declined his option with the Houston Astros to become a free agent. And all of the talks out of Houston make it seem like he is not going to re-sign with the Astros. He's looking for a little more money in free agency. Now, the free agency matrix has him getting just 2 years, $17 million in free agency. If you can get Hector Neris for that, that is a steal. I have a feeling Neris is going to be looking more in the 3 years, $30 to $35 million range, which again might be on the outskirts of the Orioles' budget there. But if it's more around the 2 years, $20 million, pounce at Hector Neris. Now, he has his drawbacks, right? 11% walk rate this year was a little iffy, right? This age 33 season this year was his best in a while, although he's been good recently. And I mentioned the dust-ups, right? There has been multiple incidents over the past couple of seasons when he's been with the Astros where he has been accused of and suspended a couple of times for throwing at an opponent. We do not like that. I could not be more against that, to be honest. But if he can channel that into just striking out more hitters, and the O's can get some clarity on why that happened, and hope that when he comes into the Orioles clubhouse, that's not the energy he's going to bring going at guys with fastballs that are in the midsection towards the head, and instead going to strike them out when he's upset with them. He can do that. 28% strikeout rate this year, 68 in the third innings, very reliable, and a 1.71 ERA. He was the best pitcher in the Astros bullpen for most of the year. Most of the year, I say. I mean, Brian Abreu by the end was probably the best, but for most of the year, Hector Neris was that guy. He has closing experience back in the day with the Phillies, which means if the O's needed to put him in that role to replace Félix Bautista for next season, they could certainly do it. And if they signed him to a 2-year deal, he'd be back as a dominant setup man when Félix returns in 2025. His splitter is unbelievable. It's not Félix unbelievable, but it's pretty unbelievable. 171 batting average against it, 42% whiff rate. Those aren't as good as Félix's numbers, but nobody's splitter is as good as Félix's. That is a still top 10 splitter in baseball. And a big right-hander with a good fastball and a better splitter filling in for Félix's Orioles closer would kind of feel right in 2024. And, hard hit percentage is 28% against him in the 98th percentile in baseball. The stuff is still there, and he seems to kind of be getting better with age. Like, he's figuring out more and more about what works in his arsenal. The only thing that worries me about Neris is that, the opting out from the Astros makes me seem like he's looking for a bigger payday than this projection, right? That's like right around the 2 years, $20 million. I think 2 years, $20 million is something the Orioles would consider and potentially do for a reliever in free agency. I don't see them going anything beyond that. So if Neris does want beyond that, it kind of cuts him off this list. But in terms of the projections right now, he's still in the O's price range. And again, I hate that he has thrown at multiple guys over the last few years. The O's will need to address that. That is not something the Orioles do. That is not something any team should do. But in terms of the production, he looks absolutely unhittable at times and has that closing experience that I think the O's are going to need without Félix next year. But that is my top 10 wish list of Orioles free agent relievers. Again, I think, Michael Givens didn't work out. You have no idea if you're going to get anything from Dylan Tate next year, and Félix Bautista's out. You had some struggles with the current guys in the pen in the postseason as well. I just think they're going to sign one reliever. I think there's no question the Orioles will sign at least one reliever, even if it is to a Michael Givens style, like 1 year, $4 million deal. And that's why I put in guys like Middleton and like Brazier and like even Ottavino and Matt Moore in this list. Like, they'll sign one of those guys. But I do think they need to sign 2 guys to really get this bullpen shored up without Félix for next year. And that top 10 right there is my wish list. But let me know right here in the YouTube comments. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And let me know in the comments how I did, what you think of my list, what you like, what you don't like. And then give me your top 5 list of free agent relievers you would like to see the Orioles sign. The comment section on yesterday's episode was kind of wild. Didn't expect some of that, but let's keep the conversation going here on today's episode. And then I will be back tomorrow. We got 2 episodes left this week on the pod. One of them, we will be continuing our player review series, talking about a couple left-handed relievers or maybe starters in DL Hall and Nick Vespi. And the other one, we'll look at free agent hitters. Now, most people think the Orioles shouldn't even bother with free agent hitters, right? They got so many young ones, but maybe they would just dive into maybe getting an outfielder or a utility player or someone to help in free agency via bats. I'll talk about my O's free agent bats wish list coming up later this week on the pod. We are back tomorrow. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.